Oh, me, what is your definition of boundaries and how can we set them?
I love that you asked that question because one of the things that I see a lot is people setting what they call boundaries and not realizing that they are actually building what I consider to be barriers. A lot of people think of a boundary as I'm going to set this rule or expectation to control your behavior or somebody else's behavior. But that's not really what a boundary is. And so I think it's important to kind of start with that non-example to clarify that setting a boundary to try to get somebody else to change their behavior is really not what a boundary is. A boundary is a choice that I am going to make about how I am going to react, I am going to behave, I am going to respond if you do a certain thing. So I'll give you kind of a concrete example. Let's say that I'm in a relationship with somebody and they are always late. Some people might say, well, I just set the boundary with them that was, if you continue to be late, um, I'm not going to do XYZ. And they do it with the intention of, I'm trying to manipulate you to be on time. Almost kind of like, if not, you're going to get punished. Like it's a child and we're trying to, teach them behavior versus having a conversation of, I really don't appreciate it when you're late. It makes me feel a certain way. I feel disrespected. I just want to let you know for future reference. If you choose to continue to be late, I will no longer wait for you and I will go about my business. That's a choice for me. It's if this person continues the behavior, what am I going to do? It's not what am I going to do to change the other person. And I think that's something that's fundamentally important to understand in any relationship we have. As much as we may think that we can actually not control anybody else's choices but our own. So that's really what a boundary is about, is what are my choices and my decisions in the face of this thing, not how am I going to try to manipulate or change somebody else's behavior or choice.
Then why do you think so many people confuse boundaries, whereas it's like, I'm setting this boundary to control the behavior of Becky versus what you just explained?
Because I think sometimes people, when we set boundaries, they do change the way that they engage with us. Because at the end of the day, if I really like you and I really want to spend time with you, but I do this thing that drives you crazy, and you set a boundary for yourself that you're not going to be around when I exhibit that behavior. I'll give another example. Let's say I'm somebody who drinks a lot, which I am not, but if I was, and let's say I had a friend who said, Becky, I really don't like to be around you when you drink so much. And so anytime you drink excessively, I'm going to remove myself from the situation. Well, they're not telling me I have to stop drinking so much. They're not telling me they're not going to spend time with me anymore. They're simply communicating what they are going to do in that situation. And sometimes we can have a boundary and not communicate it. So either way, either they tell me or I notice and I say, hey, I noticed that you haven't been coming around. What's going on with that? And they say, well, I really don't like to be around you when you drink so much. So I just choose to not be in those situations. Well, if I really care about that person, it might be a moment of reflection for me. It might be an aha moment of, oh, I never really realized that that person doesn't like the way I act when I drink, or they aren't comfortable around somebody who drinks so much. You know what? I'm going to make a concerted effort to spend more time with that person in other settings. So it could be that somebody's boundary makes me reflect on my behavior and change it. And so I think when we've had those experiences where we've been able to communicate a boundary and communicate our feelings, and we've seen the positive outcome of that, we think, oh, that it, set a boundary, get the change you want. But the reality is sometimes I might set a boundary and somebody else might say this boundary is ridiculous. So I'll give an example of that. If I have a boundary of, I don't like when people talk about weight or body image, it makes me uncomfortable. I could go out with friends that talk about it all the time. And I could say, I'm really uncomfortable when you talk about this thing. And yet, every time I see them, they might continue to bring it up continuously. Or I might have family members that continuously talk about politics, even though I ask them at every holiday to please stop. So we have to kind of go into it realizing that sometimes people respect our boundaries and shift the way they behave, but oftentimes they don't. And sometimes they still do those same behaviors that may drive us crazy. And that doesn't mean the boundary isn't working because the boundary is about us. It's not about changing them.
I like that explanation because if I take that explanation and apply it to my life, I always look at boundaries as something that lets others know what you're willing to accept and what you're not willing to accept. And then everyone has a choice. Either they're going to continue to say that, okay, you don't like drinking. Well, I'm going to get drunk around you every single time I'm around you just to piss you off, right? Because they're stepping over, they're encroaching on your boundary. And then the other aspect is that some people, because let's say of their earlier trauma, they have set so many boundaries. Now it's like their prison where no one can get in, nothing gets out, they're not growing. It's like their bubble where you're just walking around, you're like, oh my God, if I breathe too heavily, is it going to remind them of something that they've gone through and they're going to get triggered? Do you find some people have so many boundaries in place that the way that they operate in their relationships are stressful for not only themselves, but the other person as well?
Where that barriers piece comes in. So I would say people in those situations don't have too many boundaries. What they've done is they put up too many barriers because they have created a situation where, to me, boundaries are about communication and openness about my preferences, which are linked to my values. Like what matters to me, what is important to me in relationship with others. Whereas a barrier, I feel like often touches on what you're talking about, where maybe I've had some bad experiences and instead of saying, well, this is something that, I really need XYZ in terms of communication, it might be something where it's like, if this person doesn't text me good morning every morning, they're not the one for me, right? Well, to me, I don't know that that's something that really is a healthy expectation, is an expectation, it's one thing if it's, this person is in a dangerous place or I can understand in certain circumstances, but when we set those really hard lines around things that aren't really connected to values, but to your point might be connected to past bad experiences or traumas, that to me is often when you see those barriers that then become self-fulfilling prophecies, because if I have so many expectations of everyone around me, it can be really exhausting.